Monday, a few minutes after 12:30 on a Monday, which means it's time for Mike McAllister to share his thoughts on the week that was SU athletics. And Mike, let's start with this SMU game. I mean, what stood out to you the most from this win over the Mustangs on Saturday?
The fact that it felt like it was about to get away from them on several occasions, and then they continued to battle back and figured out a way to win. It was kind of almost the opposite of the Cal game, right? It felt like Syracuse was in control the majority of that game, and then, kind of late in the game, Cal makes a run at it, and we end up in double overtime. This was a game where it felt like SMU was kind of in control for a vast majority of it, and yet they kept fighting and figured out a way to win. I thought the crowd was really good, but at least, from how it sounded on television. And it was, nice to see them get a win and celebrate and against, 2 wins in a row against good teams that are, fighting for NCAA tournament spot. And I think it was a good thing to get some positivity around the program, but at the same time is frustrating when you see them play well against good teams and knowing that they're a couple of free throws and maybe a defensive stop away from, being solidly in the tournament right now.
Obviously, Mike, the big lineup change, one of them was Kyan Anthony playing the last 17 minutes of the game, J.J. Starling sitting for the last 17 minutes. Some of that, I'm sure, initially was because SMU was throwing out that zone. Knowing what we saw from Kyan in the last game, knowing what we've seen from JJ throughout the year, how would you handle the minutes? Would you change things dramatically or a little bit after what you saw in this game against SMU between the minutes of Kyan and JJ?
I wouldn't change too much based off of one performance, but if the trend continues this way, then I think you have to start looking at that and giving Kyan some more minutes. But, I think it's probably going to be matchup dependent too, right? This was a good matchup for him in that not only were they throwing zone at Syracuse, but SMU is not a great defensive team, especially off of pick and roll, which is what Syracuse likes to do offensively. So the fact that he was able to stretch the defense a little bit, was making shots, and for whatever reason, JJ just didn't quite seem to be on as he had in the previous few games. So, sometimes I think that can happen as a one-off situation as far as Kyan significantly outplaying JJ. But if this team is going to continue to win games and try to make things interesting, I don't think that's your recipe. I think your recipe is JJ playing well.
Yeah, I think this is a JJ game tonight, probably, given the matchup and given how well Duke defends. He's going to have to get to the basket tonight, so I think we're going to get a healthy dose of JJ in this game tonight. Tim brought up the point earlier, Mike, about Nate Kings and said that, the coaching staff probably should have come around a little bit sooner to the fact that he's so good off the bounce and could get to the basket, and I would agree with that. I guess, can you speak to Nate Kings' development and growth and progression as a player? We thought they were just getting a three-point shooter, like Chris Bell 2.0, but he's been much more than that, and he's shown the ability to get to the basket and won the game by getting to the basket.
Yeah, I thought I saw some flashes of that early in the season where they were giving him the ball and letting him take guys off the dribble. And then I was most impressed early on with his defensive effort, especially as a perimeter defender. So I came away from the first, handful of games or so this season saying, man, his three-point shooting at that point wasn't quite there yet. It took him a little bit to kind of get into rhythm, and part of that may be the dome and those sight lines and all that. But, it took him a little while to get a shot going. But while his shot wasn't going, the difference between him and what a Chris Bell gave you is that he was impacting the game in other ways. He could take guys off the dribble. He could be a really good perimeter defender. And yet when Chris Bell wasn't making shots, he didn't impact the game in the same way. So I think that's where you got an upgrade over last year, and we saw it come to fruition against SMU where he won that game and was one of several players that seemed to be frustrating Boopy Miller as well.
Going back to the Virginia game, Mike, this has been 3 straight nice games for Nathan George in a row. And obviously you're hitting on some of the key points with SMU and their ball screen defense, and maybe that was a little bit easier for Nathan George to have a good game, but Virginia's got a really good defense. He scored against them. He's been better in the turnover category of late. How much do you think Nathan George is improving and playing to the caliber that we thought he might be when Syracuse got him? And how much of it is just the opponents and maybe we're overreacting to just 3 games of him playing nicely?
It's probably a little bit of everything, right? There's some development there in him. And here's the other thing, right? When you have as much turnover on a roster as is typical across the sport year in and year out, it takes some guys a longer period of time to adjust to their new environment, whether it's the venue, whether it's, going to class, how far away or close you are to home, your teammates, whatever the case is. Whenever you change schools, there's things to adjust to. So it takes different people, different lengths of time to adjust to that. Some it's not a big deal, and they kind of just assimilate right in right away. Some it takes a little bit of time. And so if Nate George is one of those, if Nate Kings is one of those guys who it takes a little bit of time before he gets fully comfortable, he started to get there, then, we see the results of that on the floor. So gone are the days where, teams have 2 to 3 to 4 years to gel together and play together and learn how to play together, get comfortable with being at college, develop, all that. That's all gone. Now it's a year-to-year thing, and the rosters turn over so much that the time that you have to develop all of that is extremely accelerated. And unfortunately, sometimes, it takes half a season or 2/3 of a season before you get there.
Before we get into Duke tonight, it is our first chance to talk to you since the John Wildhack news that he announced that he will retire at the end of the academic year. Herm Frazier honored before the game on Saturday that he's stepping down as well. We know the Chancellor's moving on. Just your thoughts on the whole situation right now within the athletic department.
I don't think any of those moves individually are all that surprising, but the timing of it with where we are with the basketball program mainly raised a lot of questions for me as far as if they make the determination that they need to move on and look for a new head coach, who's making that decision? Are they letting John Wildhack make that decision before he exits? And I could understand some people saying, well, wouldn't you want the new AD to make that decision? At the same time, if he makes that decision and it doesn't work, the new AD doesn't get blamed for it. So do they look at Syracuse as a more attractive option because they've got a few years before they have to make one of those decisions? That's something to be considered. But I also think John Wildhack has gotten a lot of blame for a lot of things, and I think if you look back on his 10 years at Syracuse, yes, the football program had its shares of ups and downs. The basketball program, we understand where that is, but he did make the Fran Brown hire, which everyone seems to be pretty positive about, did make the Gary Gate hire, was responsible for some fundraising on some pretty significant projects, including dome renovations. And, all of those things I think need to be part of the resume, so to speak, when you take a step back and look at his time at Syracuse.
Mike McAllister is with us, Syracuse on 24/7 Sports. He's with us every Monday around this time as we react to all of the Syracuse sports news. And let's talk about the Duke game, Mike. What do you think stands out in this matchup? And I guess what are you expecting tonight, knowing that Syracuse has been playing better of late, but Duke is also obviously one of the best teams in the country?
They are one of the best teams in the country. I feel like if this game was here, I'd give them kind of a fighter's chance, a puncher's chance at it. But the fact that it's there, they're playing as well as they are, they're in the mix for a 1 seed. I don't see them having an off game at Cameron. So, this is a game that I'm kind of similar to the North Carolina game. I'm kind of going in just saying if they can keep this game somewhat respectable, make it in doubt a little bit into the second half, then I feel like that's I guess, moral victory for lack of a better word, but that's at least a positive showing. Obviously, where you are in terms of your record and your standings and everything else, if you really want to get back into the NCAA tournament conversation, you probably need to win either this game or Louisville, if not both. But if you can figure out a way to pull this one off, then I think given the way that the schedule is laid out the rest of the year, you've still got multiple quad one opportunities with North Carolina, Louisville, and Wake Forest is kind of right on that borderline there. You've got an opportunity to get enough quad one wins that if you end the regular season on a pretty good streak and then you go win a couple of games in the ACC tournament, maybe you at least give the committee something to look at if your net can get high enough, and then you can, start talking about, well, for this many of their losses, they didn't have Donnie and, all of those things. But that's kind of where I'm at, is realistically try to keep the game competitive and see if you can hang in there. But if you're just taking a step back and looking at where Syracuse is in the season, it feels like a game that they probably have to give themselves a reasonable shot at the NCAA tournament.
Mike, the question just popped up in the chat about recruiting of high school talent and high school seniors. Yeah. Obviously, nobody from the high school level is committed to Syracuse. We know that there's a lot of uncertainty with the coaching staff right now. Can you bring us up to date on the latest as it pertains to high school recruiting, not transfer portal stuff?
Yeah, there's no one that they're significantly in on in the 2026 recruiting class that you feel like they've got a reasonable shot with. We know that Jordan Smith recently picked Arkansas. Syracuse was involved with him. He had been on campus a few times and, had a relationship with Kyan Anthony and those types of things. But I think the fact that you do have kind of the question marks with the coaching staff and where they are moving forward, that has significantly impacted their ability, to land guys. I mean, they've been involved with guys, Vaughn Carvalho and, some other guys in the 2026 class. Haven't gotten anyone yet, obviously, but I think the fact that the coaching staff situation is what it is has significantly impacted that. I mean, you're not going to get a high-level 5-star guard like Smith, when you've got question marks around who's going to be your head coach next year. So that's just kind of is what it is, and nature of the beast when you're in this situation. But I think ultimately, if they either make the tournament and decide they're sticking with red for the foreseeable future, or if they decide to go in another direction, then from that point on, with either a new coach or some solid feelings about the future under red, then you feel like that should pick up for 2027. But I think if you do have a new coach, it's not like you're going to just suddenly go out and grab a couple of guys. Usually most of those guys are gone by then. So you look to probably filling out the roster with transfer portal guys. So it might mean a busier transfer portal offseason for Syracuse potentially.
Well, we got you, Mike. Men's lacrosse back to number 1 in the rankings for the first time since right before COVID. Got the huge victory over Maryland, and women's basketball had a great win yesterday as well. What stood out to you from watching both of those wins this weekend?
Well, from a lacrosse standpoint, it was a really entertaining game. It felt like about as close to a national championship type game as you can get in February. The announcers said that multiple times, and you guys on radio, kind of alluded to that as well. But it was good to see that. That's kind of like when I grew up, what I remembered Syracuse lacrosse being, that they were, top 5 team basically every single year, and they were competing with the best teams in the country and beating them and all that. And I also think this was important for kind of getting that Maryland monkey off their back going into the NCAA tournament, because if you get to championship weekend and you're playing for a national championship, Maryland's one of those teams that you could have to play either in a semifinal or in a final. And if you go into that having lost 9 in a row against them, I think that would make that even more of a daunting task and put even more pressure on you. So I think that was important. As far as the women's team goes, I mean, they're exciting to watch. I've said it on your program before, 21-5. They're a really good team. I know they don't have that like marquee signature top 10 type of a win, but they've still beaten a bunch of good teams, and they got another test coming up next Sunday at NC State, which will be one of their more difficult games on their schedule. But they're really good. It's fun to watch them, and I just love how energetic they play on almost every possession and how physical they are, and just dominate the boards and block shots and controlling the paint. They're just they embody Felicia Leggett-Jack in every sense.
All right, Mike, great insight as always. Thanks for coming on. Enjoy your week.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, Mike McAllister joining us as he does every Monday at 12:30. And with that, we'll hit a timeout. Market's closed today because of the holiday. So we'll wrap up hour number 1 next, and then phone lines open the rest of the way. 315-437-7644. We're back after this on ESPN Radio.